Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. For more than half a century, Hollywood liberals and America's foreign policy establishment eyed each other with suspicion. From Vietnam to Iraq, actors were often the harshest critics of whatever wars Washington was pushing at the time. A lot has changed, though. The rise of Donald Trump has caused elites from across the spectrum to realize they've got a lot more in common with each other than they do with the American middle class. Suddenly, liberals in L.A. are warming to the idea of pointless foreign wars. Rob Riener is an actor, a director, a liberal. He now has a group designed to investigate Russian interference in the last election. He's joined forces with all kinds of pro-war conservatives in Washington. Here's their latest ad. Listen carefully.
We have been attacked. We are at war. The free world is counting on us for leadership. For 241 years, our democracy has been a shining example to the world of what we can all aspire to. And we owe it to the brave people who have fought and died to protect this great nation and save democracy. And we owe it to our future generations to continue the fight.
So there's Morgan Freeman working for Rob Riener in league with longtime war enthusiasts in Washington like David Frum and Max Boot, telling us we're at war. So when does the bombing start exactly? We sat down with Rob Riener to ask him that question. Watch. So we're at war. How would you respond if President Trump took you seriously and sent the B-52s to St. Petersburg or blockaded the Gulf of Finland? Would you support that?
No. Well, when we say we're at war, we're talking about a cyber war.
It doesn't make that clear. It just says we're Morgan Freeman, who everyone trusts, his voice, evokes immediate trust in everyone. We're at war. So, but you don't really believe we're at war. Why are you saying it then?
Well, because if you watch the entire video, it talks about cyber warfare. It talks about how he was able to use, the internet and cyber tools to attack the democracy, which is what they did.
But shouldn't you say somewhere in there, we're not really at war? I mean, we're just kind of taking creative license. We're just trying to get you all pumped up. But it's not really war. Like, we shouldn't respond as you would as if you were in a war. Why not just say that so you don't confuse people?
Well, I say, if you watch the whole video,
I did.
You wouldn't be confused about it. I mean, the thing that I've always felt is that, people don't really understand the capacity for cyber warfare beyond the obvious stuff of, hacking into people's computers or using the internet. Facebook, we now find out, that they were using Facebook to push out certain kind of propaganda. Propaganda's been around forever. I mean, from Leni Riefenstahl on. So we've had plenty of propaganda.
Well, efforts by the Obama administration to unmask U.S. citizens unwittingly caught up in intelligence efforts, in other words, people who were spied upon and didn't know it, appear to be much greater than anybody knew or even guessed. According to sources interviewed by Fox News, Samantha Power, who was Obama's UN ambassador from 2013 to 2017 and a political aide before that, made almost daily requests to unmask the identities of U.S. citizens, often with no obvious reason for doing so. Power previously has denied any role in leaking classified information about U.S. citizens. Joel Rubin was a Deputy Assistant Secretary of State under President Obama, and he joins us tonight. Joel, thanks a lot for coming on.
My pleasure. Thanks, Tucker.
So this is exactly the kind of scenario the rest of us were assured would not happen when one of these periodic debates about spying on American citizens breaks out. For instance, the NSA. We were told, look, there's no chance anyone's going to spy on you, and if you're talking to someone who's being spied upon, your identity will remain secret. And now we find that a very political appointee, Samantha Power, with no background in foreign policy, by the way, just appointed to this position, was unmasking people at the rate of more than one a day. What could possibly be a legitimate explanation for that?
Well, Tucker, it's interesting. I was a career officer in a classified position during the Bush administration at the State Department, and we would oftentimes read intelligence reports. In fact, first thing in the morning, we would do what they call read-in, and sometimes names would show up that were American, but they would be blacked out, and so one wouldn't see it. And that's essentially, that's masking. But what happens is the Americans end up getting caught up in surveillance when the U.S. is targeting adversaries. And at the UN, there are many adversaries. As you know, there are many countries who want to do us harm. So if our government is surveilling those countries and American names show up, that's what happens, and those names get masked. And it's very important to understand what is going on. Are these Americans being targeted by these governments? Are these Americans up to no good? And that's oftentimes really what's going on.
So how many terror attacks do you think Samantha Power thwarted by unmasking the names of over 200 Americans?
Honestly, it's not Samantha Power unmasking the names. What would happen is there would be a request into the FBI, the National Security Agency, whether or not to unmask. They determine whether or not those names get unmasked. And an official, a diplomat in this position can't asked to target or identify certain individuals and follow them. There really are rules of the road in how this proceeds.
Doesn't seem like it. And just to be totally clear, in contrast with you, Samantha Power is not a career diplomat. She was a very low-level journalist, a freelancer, and then she was an Obama staffer. And at some point, she worked at Harvard as an academic. So she's a political person. Don't you think that we should be a little uncomfortable that she put in a request of more than one a day for an unmasking as a political person? That doesn't bother you at all? Well, Hillary Clinton went on her recent book tour to tell America what happened. And it turns out that what happened is that Hillary Clinton became the country's biggest sore loser. In a recent interview with CNN, she called for the abolition of the Electoral College, which for 230 years has dictated the election of U.S. presidents. Watch this.
Do you think the Electoral College should be abolished?
I said that in 2000, after what happened to the 2000 election with Al Gore. We've moved toward one person, one vote. That's how we select winners. I was amused after the French elections when I was listening to an interview with a French electoral expert, and he said, well, unlike your country, the person who wins the most votes wins. So I think it needs to be eliminated. I'd like to see us move beyond it, yes.
Leslie Marshall is a talk radio show host, and she agrees with Hillary that we ought to abolish the Electoral College, and she joins us tonight. Leslie, good to see you.
Good to see you, Tucker.
So pardon my skepticism, but this last election seems to have changed the views of liberals on many things. I mean, for almost my entire life, liberals supported Russia, particularly when it was Soviet Russia. Now they're against it because Hillary blames Russia for her loss. The Electoral College has functioned, for a couple of centuries. We're a prosperous, happy country. Now we have to abolish it because she doesn't like it. Can you look right into the camera and say, if Hillary had lost the popular vote but won the Electoral College, you'd be for abolishing it?
Actually, I would, Tucker, because before I was a Democrat, do not faint, when I was in college and I was an independent, I was against the Electoral College then, and I still am now, regardless of the outcome of the election. Now, I must admit, in our history, 5 elections have gone against Democrats and favored Republicans with the Electoral College versus the popular vote. But that's honestly not why. As a Democrat, of course, I'll take the advantage if it comes up. But I don't think it's an advantage. I think it's a disadvantage. I'm in a state, for example, here in California, where numerous people will say, my vote doesn't count. And that includes many Republicans who are like, it's just going to go to the Democratic candidate anyway. And unfortunately, that's true. There is something to one voice, one vote. I believe, and I love a democracy, a true democracy. And even though we operate as a republic, I would like to see a majority rule, even if my candidate loses. And by the way, the president himself, back in 2012, said the Electoral College was a disaster for democracy, and he changed his mind as well. So it's not just us liberals who changed their minds.
I'm not surprised. Then, I mean, let's take what you're saying seriously. If we're going to have a one-man, one-vote system, pure democracy, as you said, real democracy, then we've got to abolish the Senate because it's not, of course, democratic. A senator from California represents 40 million people. A senator from Wyoming represents a little over 500,000. It's not one voice, one vote, as you put it. It's totally skewed. So you'd get rid of the Senate, right?
Well, I think when you have progress in a nation and you change, certainly our country has changed in the past 230 years, from the late 1700s till now. I mean, not just our demographics, not just how many states do we have now compared to then. Honestly, and I know they're going to get mad at me in Rhode Island, but to have two people representing Rhode Island and two people, you mentioned the state I'm in, of California, representing the population of this state, which is larger than some nations throughout the world. No, I don't think it's right. And I know you're going to be.
But are you ready for this?
The two-party system is a bit archaic as well. So let's change it.
I mean, then maybe you just want a. Do you want a direct democracy? You ready for the consequences, though? Because gay marriage wouldn't be the law of the land. It lost in California, as you know. Global warming, not even a concern for most people. You'd never get a carbon tax under a direct democracy. And you'd have to change the population of the country. So, in other words, the idea that the majority rules, it's a great idea, and I'm for it. I'm more on the populist side, but a pure democracy would disenfranchise rich liberals, the ones who run the Democratic Party, completely. Their ideas have no popular support. Is that a concern for you?
I don't think their ideas have no populist support. And I understand what you're saying about a vote here in California. You have to look at the demographic of the voters, and you have to look at also the language of that ballot measure here in California.
Okay.
On a national scale. On a national scale, polls show that most liberal social issues are actually viewed favorably by both left and right, whether it's legalizing marijuana, gay marriage, and things like that. And honestly, Tucker, most fiscal issues, left and right, are more so agreed on. People are, even Democrats, even myself, are a bit more fiscally conservative. So I think it would work out. And quite frankly, I want everyone to feel that they have a voice. And in this state of California, where I live, and in the rest of the states in this country, I know many people don't vote. Look at how few people vote in our elections, not just our presidential elections, our local elections.
Because people voted this time. The public said it wanted something different. They elected Trump, and like everyone in L.A. has been having an aneurysm ever since.
How many people voted? How many people voted?
Leslie, I don't know.
The amount of people that can vote, how many people voted in this election compared to the numbers and percentages in other countries?
People, because people who care vote. I'm happy with that. Leslie Marshall, thank you for joining us tonight. Great to see you.
Thank you, Tucker.